I never thought I'd be the woman lying in a hospital bed in Birmingham, still bleeding, still trembling after labor, while my husband walked out on me as if I'd just destroyed everything we'd built. I remember staring at the door after he left, my newborn son crying in the bassinet beside me, and thinking, what had I done wrong? What could possibly make the man who had held my hand through every contraction suddenly look at me like I was someone he didn't know at all? And the worst part was the feeling I couldn't shake. That sick, heavy drop in my chest. The sense that whatever was happening was about to rip my whole family apart. We had been together for 6 years. 6 years of building a life that, to me, felt genuine, steady, safe. We'd been married for 3. And yes, we had our flaws, everyone does. But I always believed we were solid enough to survive anything. Now, when I look back, I can see the cracks more clearly than I could then. The tiny moments of doubt. The questions that hung in the air a little longer than they should have. If I'm being honest, we both had trust issues. Not because either of us had cheated, but because we were both the sort of people who needed reassurance more than we ever admitted out loud. Even then, it never felt serious. It never felt like the kind of thing that could truly ruin us. Until our son was born. Our daughter had come into the world 2 years earlier, and everything about that moment had been beautiful, planned, welcomed, celebrated with flowers from his mum, a roast dinner waiting at home, and a flood of messages from family in the group chat. She looked like both of us in the loveliest way, my features softened by his complexion glowing through her. He was brilliant with her, the kind of dad people genuinely admire, the kind who changed nappies without being asked, got up in the middle of the night, and didn't just help with parenting, but actually showed up for it, fully, naturally, gladly. So when I got pregnant again, even though it wasn't exactly planned, I wasn't frightened. We could handle it, or at least I thought we could. My pregnancy with our son was harder. I was sick more often, drained in a way I'd never known before. But he stepped up, he really did. He took over so much with our daughter so I could rest. He cooked, cleaned, made sure I had water, food, my vitamins, anything I needed. There was even a week before my due date when he took time off work just to be with me. He treated me like I was fragile in the gentlest way, like I mattered, like we were a team bringing another life into the world together. That's why what happened next felt so unreal. When our son was born, I was overwhelmed. Relief, pain, love, they all crashed over me at once. I remember hearing his first cry and feeling tears run down my face before I even realized I was crying. But I didn't notice my husband right away. It wasn't until later that a midwife mentioned, almost casually, that he'd stepped out of the room. At the time, I brushed it aside. I was too consumed by everything happening to really think about it. Maybe he'd felt overwhelmed. Maybe he just needed air. Maybe seeing me in pain had shaken him. I didn't think much of it. Not then. But when he came back later with our daughter to visit, something was wrong. He didn't look at me the same way. He didn't look at our son at all. It wasn't dramatic. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't crying. It was worse than that. He was cold, distant, like he'd already reached some conclusion in his mind, and I was the only person in the room who didn't know what it was. He talked to our daughter, smiled at her, picked her up, kissed her cheek. But when it came to me and the baby, it was as though we weren't even there. That feeling. I still don't know how to explain it properly. It was like sitting across from someone you love and realizing, in one sharp, awful moment, that they've already left you in every way that matters. I kept trying to tell myself he was overwhelmed, that maybe becoming a father of 2 had hit him harder than expected, that maybe he just needed space. So I gave him space. For a couple of days, I didn't push. I didn't question him. I let the silence settle between us, because I thought forcing him to talk might only make things worse. But inside, I was coming apart. Every time he avoided my eyes, every time he stepped out of the room too quickly, every time he barely acknowledged our son, it wore me down piece by piece until I couldn't take it anymore. The night before everything changed, I finally asked him. I remember standing there in our bedroom, my hands still slightly unsteady, my body still sore and recovering, my mind moving too fast for me to keep up with. "What's going on with you?" He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, and said he couldn't talk to me about it, that he was too angry to even speak. And then he said something that felt like a slap. "I'll email you." An email. After 6 years together, after a marriage, a home, a daughter, and now a newborn son, he was going to explain himself in an email. I didn't know how to react. I just stood there, numb, watching him walk away from me again. That night was one of the longest of my life. I barely slept. My thoughts kept spiraling in circles. What could possibly make him this angry? What had I done? Was he hiding something from me? Was there someone else? Was our whole marriage built on something I hadn't seen? But deep down, I knew it wasn't that, because the look in his eyes hadn't been guilt. It had been accusation. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach, and there it was, an email from him. I stared at the subject line for ages before opening it. My hands felt freezing cold. My chest was tight. Like some part of me already knew that whatever I was about to read would change everything. And when I finally opened it, I wished I hadn't. He said our son was white, that it was obvious the baby wasn't his, that he refused to be part of my life or our son's life until a DNA test proved he was the father. I reread those lines again and again, as if my brain simply refused to process them. White. Not his. DNA test. Each word landed harder than the last. At first, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd, so completely ridiculous, that my brain didn't know what else to do. This man, the same man who had held me while I cried during pregnancy, the same man who kissed my stomach and talked to our unborn child at night, was accusing me of cheating on him. And not just accusing me. He had already decided I was guilty, without talking to me, without asking a single question, without giving me even one chance to explain anything. Just judgment. Something rose up in my chest then. Anger, hurt, disbelief, all twisted together into something so sharp I could barely breathe around it. Because it wasn't only the accusation, it was the way he handled it. The silence, the distance, the email, like I wasn't even worthy of a conversation. And the worst part, he truly believed it. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at my phone, reading the same lines over and over, as though they might somehow change if I looked long enough. They didn't. And each time I read them, It hurt more. He really believed I had cheated on him. Not wondered, not feared, not suspected. Believed it. My chest tightened like something heavy was pressing down on it, making it hard to breathe. My first instinct was to defend myself, to ring him, scream at him, demand to know how he could possibly think something like that about me. But then another feeling crept in. Colder, quieter, somehow worse. If I had to prove I hadn't cheated, then what did that say about the way he saw me? Because to me, that was the real problem, not the DNA test, not even the accusation itself. It was the fact that after 6 years, after everything we had built together, his first instinct when faced with uncertainty was to assume betrayal. I started thinking back over all the small moments in our relationship, the times he asked where I'd been, the way he sometimes lingered too long over a name on my phone, the odd little comments I'd dismissed as harmless insecurity. I had always told myself, it's nothing. Everyone gets insecure sometimes. But now, it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like a foundation I hadn't realized was cracked all along. And now, it had split open. I looked over at my son, asleep beside me, completely unaware that his existence had just caused this massive break in our family. He looked peaceful, tiny, defenseless, and I felt this fierce, overwhelming need to protect him from everything, even from his own father. That thought alone made my stomach churn, because I didn't want that. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who kept her child from his dad. I didn't want a broken home. I didn't want any of this, but I also wasn't going to let someone question my character like that and simply accept it. I picked up my phone to reply to his email, and for 1 second, I nearly typed exactly what I felt. You're a bastard. That was it. That was all I wanted to say, because how else do you respond to something like that? But I stopped, because I knew that if I sent it, there would be no coming back from it. And that's when the real conflict hit me. If I refused the DNA test, he would leave. I knew that. There was no version of this where he simply got over it. He had convinced himself of something, and without proof, he wasn't going to change his mind. But if I agreed to the test, what did that mean? Was I validating his accusation? Was I telling him it was acceptable to question me like that? Was I setting the tone for the rest of our marriage, that every time he doubted me, I had to produce evidence of my innocence? It felt like a no-win situation, and I hated that I was even in it. I started typing again, more slowly this time. I told him I hadn't cheated, that our son was his, that what he was saying had hurt me more deeply than I could put into words. But I didn't answer him about the test. Not yet, because I needed time. Time to think, time to breathe, time to work out how to respond without burning everything to the ground. But the truth was, I already knew this wasn't just about a test. It was about trust. And once trust breaks like that, it doesn't simply come back because you want it to. Later that day, he came home. I heard the front door open, his footsteps in the hallway. All the familiar sounds that used to make me feel safe. Now they only made my heart pound. At first, I didn't move. I just sat there on the sofa, holding our son, bracing myself. When he came into the room, the silence between us felt heavy enough to choke on. He looked at me, but not fully. His eyes kept flickering away, like even now he couldn't quite hold my gaze. I was the one who spoke first. Do you really think I cheated on you? My voice came out quieter than I expected. Not furious, not shouting, just exhausted. He didn't answer straight away, and that silence told me more than any words could have. Finally, he gave the smallest shrug. I don't know what to think. That hurt. God, that hurt hurt more than if he'd just said yes. Because I don't know meant he was willing to believe the worst of me. I swallowed hard, trying to hold myself together. "You didn't even talk to me," I said. "You just decided." He shook his head, jaw tightening. "Look at him," he said, gesturing towards our son. "He doesn't look like me." Something snapped inside me. "He does," I shot back, my voice rising now. "He just has lighter skin. That happens. You know that happens." But he stood there with his arms folded, like he'd already made up his mind, and my words were only background noise. And that's when I realized something that made my chest feel hollow. He wasn't listening to me at all. This wasn't a conversation. It was a standoff. "I'm not raising someone else's child," he said flatly. The words echoed in my head. Someone else's child. As if our son was already nothing to him. As if everything we had built meant nothing. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Then what?" I asked. "You just walk away? From me? From him? From all of it?" "If he's mine, I'll stay," he said. If. That word hit like a fist to the stomach. If. Not because I trust you. Not because I know you. Not because I believe in us. Just if. I looked at him for a long time, trying to find the man I had married in the face in front of me. But I couldn't. Because the man standing there was willing to throw away 6 years without even bothering to seek the truth first. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, because I realized this wasn't just about saving our family anymore. It was about whether this family was even worth saving. I didn't answer him straight away. I just sat there, holding our son a little tighter, feeling his tiny breaths against my chest, trying to steady the chaos inside me. Because the truth was, I was standing at a crossroads, and whichever direction I chose was going to change everything. I had spent days thinking I needed to save this family, but in that moment, looking at the man in front of me, this version of him, I found myself asking a different question. Why was I the only one trying to save it? I took a slow breath and finally said it. "Fine, we'll do the test." The words came out calm, too calm, and I saw it in his face. Relief. Relief. That hit me harder than anything else, because instead of looking ashamed, instead of realizing how badly he'd hurt me, he looked like he had just won something, like this was reasonable, like this was normal. And that's when I knew that even if the test proved what I already knew, something between us was already broken. We arranged the DNA test within the week. Everything about it felt cold and clinical. Like we weren't husband and wife anymore, just two people handling a dispute. Forms, appointments, quiet car journeys. Barely any words. He didn't touch me. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He barely even looked at our son when we went in. I noticed every bit of it, every inch of distance, every absence of care. And with each passing moment, something in me hardened a little more. The test itself was quick. A swab, a signature, a confirmation. But the waiting was unbearable. Days stretched into something that felt much longer. Every morning I woke up with the same weight in my chest, knowing that somewhere out there was a piece of paper that would decide whether my husband stayed or left. And I hated that. I hated that my marriage had been reduced to lab results. I hated that my loyalty required evidence. And more than anything, I hated that he was comfortable with that. We barely spoke during that time. We moved around each other like strangers sharing a house. Careful, quiet, avoiding anything that might lead to another fight. But silence has a way of saying everything. And in that silence, I admitted something to myself that I hadn't wanted to face before. Even if he stayed, I didn't know if I could ever see him the same way again, because love without trust isn't love. It's fear, dressed up to look like it belongs. The results came in on a Tuesday morning. I remember the moment exactly. I was standing in the kitchen, mug of tea in my hand, staring out at the gray sky over the garden, the way I had every morning that week, lost in thoughts I couldn't untangle. My phone buzzed. An email from the lab. My hands started shaking immediately. Not because I didn't know the truth, but because I knew what that moment meant. I opened it. And there it was. 99.9% probability of paternity. He was the father. Of course he was. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. But it wasn't relief. It was something heavier than that. Because now it was his turn. I forwarded the email to him. No message, no explanation, just the result. And then I waited. Not for long. Within minutes, my phone rang. I stared at it for a second before answering. "Hi," he said. His voice sounded different, softer. "Careful." I saw the results. I didn't say anything. I just waited. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. I didn't know what to think. I panicked. I closed my eyes. There it was. The apology. The thing I'd thought I wanted. But hearing it didn't repair anything. "Okay," I said quietly. There was a pause on the other end. "Okay," he repeated. "Yes," I said. "You were wrong. Now you know." Another silence, and I could feel it. He was waiting for something else. Forgiveness, comfort, a path back to normal. But I didn't have any of that to give him. "I was scared," he added. "You have to understand." "No," I interrupted, my voice sharper now. "I don't." That stopped him, because it was the first time I'd pushed back without softening it for him. "You didn't ask me," I continued. "You didn't talk to me. You didn't give me any chance to explain. You just decided I'd cheated." "I didn't decide." "You did," I cut in again. "The moment you said you wouldn't be part of his life until there was proof. That was your decision." He went quiet, and for the first time since all this began, I felt like I had some control again. Not over him, over myself. "I just needed to be sure," he said eventually, his voice smaller now. I laughed. A tiny, bitter laugh. And I needed to be trusted. That landed between us harder than I expected, because after I said it, there was nothing left to say. No argument, no defense, no explanation that would make it better. Just the truth. We ended the call not long after, and I sat there, staring at my phone, realizing something that felt both terrifying and strangely freeing. The test proved he was the father, but it also proved something else. That I deserved better than someone who needed evidence before he could believe in me. And now I had to decide what to do with that truth. I wish I could say everything changed after that. That once the truth was undeniable, he came home, held me, apologized in some way that made the whole thing feel repairable. But life doesn't work like that. He did come home that evening. I heard the front door open, slower than usual, as though he wasn't sure what he was walking into. I was in the living room, sitting on the sofa with our son asleep on my chest, the soft rhythm of his breathing the only thing keeping me grounded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he came in, hesitated, and sat down opposite me. "I messed up," he said. I looked at him. Really looked at him. His eyes were tired. There was guilt there, yes. Regret. Maybe even fear. But what I didn't see anymore was the man who had once made me feel safe. "You think?" I replied quietly. There was no anger in my voice, and somehow that made it worse, because anger can be fought through. This felt like distance. "I'm sorry," he said again, leaning forward with his hands clasped together, like he was trying to physically hold himself together. I let my head get the better of me. I saw the difference, and And you assumed I cheated, I finished for him. He nodded slowly. I panicked. I shook my head, not really in disagreement, but in disbelief. You didn't panic, I said. You shut me out. You walked away. You treated me like I was guilty without even hearing me. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, because he knew I was right. And him, I added, glancing down at our son. You didn't even look at him. Do you have any idea what that felt like? His eyes followed mine. For the first time since our son was born, he really looked at him, properly looked, and I saw it then. The flicker of something breaking inside him. Guilt. Real, heavy guilt. I was wrong, he whispered, but the words felt late, too late. I know, I said. Another silence. But this one felt different. Not tense, not explosive, just empty. I want to fix this, he said after a while. And there it was, the question underneath the words. Can we go back? Can we undo this? Can we be who we were before? I swallowed hard, feeling the tightness in my chest grow stronger, because part of me wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted to rewind everything, wanted the old version of us back, the one that felt simple and safe and whole. But that version didn't exist anymore. You can't fix this overnight, I said carefully.
I know, he replied quickly. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll earn your trust back. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family.
Our family, the words echoed in my mind, because that was exactly what I had been trying to protect the entire time. But now, I wasn't sure whether holding on to it, no matter the cost, was the right thing to do. I need time, I said. He nodded straight away. Take all the time you need. And for the first time since all this started, he didn't push. He didn't argue. He just accepted it. The days after that were strange. He tried. I'll give him that. He started helping more again, talking more, being present. He held our son, fed him, even stayed up with him one night when the baby wouldn't settle. From the outside, it probably looked as though things were returning to normal. But inside, nothing was normal, because every time I looked at him, I remembered the email, the accusation, the way he walked out of that hospital room. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't unfeel it. Trust isn't something you switch back on. It either exists or it doesn't. And right then, it didn't. One night, after I'd put both children to bed, I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at nothing. He came in quietly, like he was afraid to disturb me. "Hey," he said softly. I looked up. "Hey." He hesitated, then sat across from me again, just like he had that first night. "I've been thinking," he said. My heart sank a little, because I had been thinking, too, constantly.
I know I hurt you, he continued. And I know I can't just say sorry and expect everything to be fine. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere.
I nodded slowly. I hear you. But hearing him wasn't the same thing as believing everything would be all right. I just need to know, he added carefully, whether you still want this. That question. It hung there between us, heavy, final. And I realized this was the moment I had to be honest, not just with him, with myself. I took a deep breath. I don't know, I admitted, and saying it out loud felt like relief and heartbreak at the same time, because it was the truth. I didn't know whether love by itself was enough to rebuild what had been broken. I didn't know whether I could ever trust him fully again. I didn't know whether I wanted to spend the rest of my life wondering if the next flash of doubt would shatter everything all over again. But I also didn't know whether I was ready to walk away. "I still love you," I said quietly. "But love isn't the problem." He nodded slowly, his face heavy with understanding. "I know. And I don't want to make a decision because I'm angry," I continued, "or scared, or pressured. I need to work out what's best for me and for our children." He looked down for a second, then back up at me. "I'll wait," he said. And for the first time, I believed him, not because everything was fixed, but because, finally, he understood the weight of what he had done. And as I sat there in that quiet kitchen, I realized something that changed the way I saw all of it. This wasn't just about whether our marriage would survive. It was about whether I was willing to accept a version of love that needed proof instead of trust. And I still don't have all the answers. I'm still living in that space between what was and what could be. But I know this much. I deserve to be believed. I deserve to be trusted. And whatever happens next, that is not something I'm willing to compromise on. I'm still trying to make sense of all of it. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to hear more of my story, make sure you subscribe.